I shouldn't have kissed her that first night. It happened in a hotel hallway in Denver, after midnight, the carpet thick and quiet under our feet. My room key was already in my hand. Hers was shaking slightly in hers. We had been talking for hours downstairs in the bar, long after her family went up, long after my coworkers called it a night. I remember the way she laughed, soft at first, then deeper when she forgot herself. I remember how close we were standing by the elevators. Close enough that I could feel the warmth of her arm against mine. When the elevator doors opened, either of us stepped back. Inside, it was just the hum of cables and the faint scent of her perfume. Something clean, not sweet. She looked straight ahead at the floor numbers lighting up. I watched the reflection of us in the mirrored wall. Me, 38, traveling for a logistics conference I barely cared about. Gray suit, loosened tie. Divorced for 2 years and still pretending I preferred hotel rooms to empty apartments back in Chicago. Her, maybe mid-40s. Beautiful in a way that didn't try too hard. Dark hair pulled back. A thin gold ring on her right hand, not a wedding ring. She had told me over drinks that she was there with her parents and her teenage son. A family trip before her son left for college. She said it like she was bracing for something. When the elevator stopped at her floor, she hesitated. "You're on 12 too," she said quietly. I nodded. My voice felt stuck somewhere in my chest. The hallway was empty. Doors closed. Ice machine humming at the far end. We walked side by side, not touching, but aware of every inch between us. I could feel the pull. It wasn't just attraction. It was recognition. The kind you don't expect at your age. We stopped outside her door first. She turned to me. For a second, either of us spoke. Her eyes searched my face like she was trying to make a responsible decision. "This is reckless," she said, almost to herself. "I know." She smiled at that. Not playful. Honest. I don't remember deciding to move closer. I just did. My hand came up to her waist slowly, giving her time to step away. She didn't. Her fingers curled into the front of my shirt, light at first, then firmer. The kiss wasn't rushed. It wasn't yum. It was slow, deliberate, like we both understood what it meant. Her back pressed lightly against the door. My forehead rested against hers after, both of us breathing a little heavier than we should have been. We didn't go further. Not that night. But I felt it in my chest, deep and steady. Something had shifted. The strange thing is, that wasn't actually the moment that changed everything. It happened the next morning. I was in the hotel café, half awake, answering emails before heading to the conference center. She was at a table near the window with her family. Her parents were polite, silver-haired, dressed for sightseeing. Her son was on his phone. And across from her sat a man I hadn't seen the night before. Tall. Corporate. Early 50s maybe. Wedding ring shining. I wasn't trying to stare, but I couldn't look away. He was speaking low but sharp. I caught fragments. "You're not 30 anymore, Claire." Her shoulders stiffened. "You should be grateful someone still wants you." Her mother looked down at her coffee. Her son went still. My chest tightened. The kind of tight that doesn't ask permission. Claire didn't cry. She didn't argue. She just nodded once, like she'd heard it before. Like it wasn't new. I felt heat climb up my neck. He stood up abruptly, adjusting his jacket. "Think about what I said," he added, like he was offering business advice. And that was when I realized something about myself. For 2 years after my divorce, I had stayed quiet. At work. In life. I let things slide. I told myself it was maturity. I told myself it was peace. But watching him talk to her like she was an expired product on a shelf did something to me. I stood up before I could overthink it. I walked straight to their table. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw me approach. The man looked annoyed. "Sorry," I said calmly, meeting his gaze. "I couldn't help overhearing." He stiffened. "This is a private conversation." "Maybe," I said. "But telling someone they should be grateful for basic decency doesn't sound private. It sounds small." Silence dropped over the table. Claire's father blinked at me. Her son finally looked up. The man's jaw tightened. "And you are? Someone who thinks she deserves better than that." My heart was pounding. I am not the kind of man who confronts strangers in cafes. I handle spreadsheets. I fly home on Sundays. I keep my head down. But I didn't step back. He stared at me for a long second, then gave a dismissive shake of his head and walked away. Just like that. I looked at Claire. Up close in the morning light, she looked tired. Strong, but tired. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "That wasn't my place." She studied me for a moment. Then something softened. "No," she said. "It was." She told me later that she almost didn't come back down to the cafe after that. She had gone up to her room with her parents, closed the door, and stood there for a full minute just breathing. That was what she said. Just breathing. Trying to steady herself before facing the day. I was still at the table when she returned. My coffee had gone cold. I kept replaying what I'd said to that man, wondering if I had crossed a line. I don't usually interfere. I am the kind of person who minds his business, who avoids scenes. But that morning, something in me refused to stay quiet. When she walked back in alone, she looked different. Not weaker. Just unguarded. She stopped at my table and said she didn't usually let strangers fight her battles. Her tone was calm, almost amused, but there was something behind it. I told her I wasn't trying to be a hero. I just couldn't sit there and pretend I hadn't heard him. She sat down across from me without asking. For a few seconds we just looked at each other. The noise of the cafe carried on around us. Plates clinking. Espresso machine hissing. It felt oddly private anyway. She said his name was Richard. An old colleague. Someone who used to be interested in her years ago. He had reappeared recently, suddenly attentive, suddenly persistent. She admitted she had agreed to meet him on the trip because part of her wondered if maybe he was right. Maybe she should be grateful someone still saw her that way. When she said that, she didn't look at me. She stirred sugar into a cup that didn't need it. I told her I didn't understand how someone like her could believe that. She gave a small laugh and said women her age were trained to believe it. She said the world had a way of reminding you that you were past your prime. Past desirable. Past worth chasing. It hit harder than I expected. I told her I knew something about feeling replaced. My ex-wife had moved on quickly. Younger guy. Startup founder. All energy and big plans. I had been steady. Predictable. Reliable. Apparently that translated to boring. Claire looked up at that. Really looked at me. She said she didn't think steady was boring. She said steady sounded safe. There was a pause after that. Not awkward. Just quiet. She asked what I did. I explained the logistics firm in Chicago, the conference I was attending, how I had almost skipped it because I didn't see the point. She told me she ran operations for a healthcare company in Seattle. 15 years there. Worked her way up. She said it like it didn't matter, but it did. I noticed the way she straightened slightly when she talked about work. That was where she felt solid. She admitted she was tired of being strong all the time. Tired of making decisions. Tired of pretending she didn't want someone to choose her without hesitation. The honesty of that caught me off guard. Time slipped. I checked my phone and realized nearly an hour had passed. I had missed the opening keynote. She smiled when I muttered about it, and said she hoped she hadn't gotten me in trouble. I told her it was the most useful hour I'd had all week. She hesitated before asking if I meant what I said earlier, about her deserving better. I told her I did. She held my gaze longer than before. Something shifted there. Not dramatic. Just recognition. Before she left to meet her parents, she said she didn't usually open up to men she met in hotel cafes. I admitted I didn't usually confront strangers on behalf of women I had just kissed in hallways. Her eyebrows lifted slightly at that. A quiet reminder of the night before. She didn't pull away from it. Instead, she said she was free later that evening after dinner with her family. She didn't frame it as a date. She just said if I was still around, maybe we could talk somewhere quieter. I told her I would be. As she walked away, I realized something simple and unsettling. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't thinking about how to protect myself. I was thinking about how to show up. That evening turned into a pattern before either of us admitted it. We met in the hotel bar again after her parents went up. She said her son had teased her about having plans. I tried not to smile too much at that. We sat closer this time. Not touching at first, just aware. The conversation picked up where it had left off that morning, like it had been paused instead of ended. 2 weeks later, after we were both back in our own cities, we were still texting every day. It started practical. Safe. She sent a message asking if I survived the rest of the conference. I told her I had barely. I asked how the rest of her trip went. She said she had avoided Richard entirely. That she had felt lighter for it. Then the messages got longer. We moved from polite check-ins to small details. She would text me a photo of her morning coffee on her kitchen counter in Seattle. I would send her a shot of the Chicago skyline from my office window. She told me about a staffing issue at work. I told her about a client who kept changing requirements at the last minute. By October, we were calling instead of texting. The first late-night call lasted 3 hours. I sat on the edge of my bed with the lights off, listening to her talk about the early days of her career. She said she had been the only woman in the room most of the time. That she had learned to speak less but prepare more. I told her I had always been the steady second in command. The reliable one. The man who fixed problems quietly but never took the spotlight. She said she liked that about me. After a month of this, the distance felt less like a boundary and more like tension. We started planning visits under reasonable excuses. She had business in Chicago in early November. I had a client pitch in Seattle 2 weeks after that. We both pretended it was coincidence. When she came to Chicago, I picked her up from O'Hare. I remember standing near baggage claim, scanning faces, and then seeing her. Black coat. Hair down this time. She smiled when she spotted me. Not wide. Just real. I hugged her. It lasted a second longer than necessary. That night we had dinner in a small Italian place near my apartment. Nothing flashy. Red brick walls. Quiet jazz. We talked easily, but there was something else under it. The memory of that hallway in Denver hadn't faded. When we got back to my place, the air shifted. I offered her a drink. She said yes. We stood in my kitchen, closer than we had been before. No family nearby. No hotel hallway. Just my apartment. My life. She ran her fingers lightly along the edge of the counter while I poured wine. Her hand brushed mine when I passed her the glass. Neither of us pulled back immediately. I told her she didn't look like someone past her prime. She exhaled slowly at that. Stepped closer. The kiss this time wasn't hesitant. It was deeper. Slower. Years of restraint meeting in one place. My hands found her waist again. Hers slid up my chest, fingers curling into my shirt like before, only firmer. We moved to the couch without saying much. Sat close. Closer than before. Her legs tucked slightly toward mine. My arm resting along the back behind her shoulders. Eventually, she leaned in. Head against my chest. It felt steady. Not rushed. Not careless. We didn't talk about labels. We didn't talk about what this meant long term. But when she stayed the night, when I woke up to her hair across my pillow and her hand resting lightly against my side, I knew something had changed. 6 months after that first coffee in Denver, the rhythm of us was established. We visited once or twice a month. Alternating cities. We learned each other's habits. She liked quiet mornings. I made coffee the same way every time. She read emails in bed before getting up. I checked headlines while brushing my teeth. We worked side by side at my dining table during one of her longer stays. Laptops open. Occasional glances. Comfortable silence. But underneath it all was the complication we both felt and rarely named. In January, my company announced a restructuring. We were merging with a larger healthcare operations firm. A national one. When the acquisition details came out, her company's name was on the document. She called me that night. Her voice was steady but different. She said she had just come out of a leadership meeting. She would be overseeing integration on her side. I would likely be part of the implementation team from mine. In plain terms, she would outrank me. We both went quiet after that. It wasn't scandalous. We worked in different cities. Different divisions. But there would be overlap. Reporting lines. visibility. She said she didn't want to jeopardize my career. I said I didn't want to become a liability for her. For the first time since Denver, doubt entered the room. But 2 weeks later, when we were sitting on my couch again, laptops closed, the weight of it hanging between us, she reached for my hand first. She said she was tired of building her life around what might go wrong. I told her I wasn't interested in stepping back. We didn't solve the problem that night. We didn't map out policy or worst-case scenarios. But when she leaned into me and I felt her relax against my chest, I understood what was at stake. This wasn't just a long-distance connection anymore. It was something that would require us to choose it, even when it got complicated. The night everything finally broke open wasn't dramatic. It wasn't some grand crisis with flashing lights and shouting. It was a conference room in Chicago, too cold from overactive air conditioning, both of us sitting at opposite ends of a long polished table while our teams argued over timelines. The merger had officially begun. For weeks, we had been careful. Professional in meetings. Neutral in emails. No inside jokes. No late-night calls on days when we knew we would both be presenting. We were disciplined. Maybe too disciplined. That afternoon, one of my senior managers challenged her numbers in front of everyone. Not aggressively, but sharply enough to draw attention. He implied her projections were optimistic. Impractical. She didn't flinch. She calmly walked through every assumption, every data source. Clear. Controlled. Precise. By the time she finished, the room had shifted toward her. I felt something close to pride. Not possessive. Not romantic. Just respect. After the meeting, I stayed behind to gather my papers. She was at the far end of the table, sliding her laptop into her bag. The room had emptied. I told her she handled that well. She gave a small nod and said she had been handling rooms like that for 20 years. Then her voice softened. She admitted it still cost her something every time. That was the first crack. Later that evening, we were back at my apartment. We had ordered takeout and barely touched it. The tension of the day hadn't faded. It had just changed shape. She stood by the window looking out at the city lights. I stood a few feet behind her, unsure where to place myself. There was so much we weren't saying. She spoke first. She said she didn't know how to separate this from work anymore. That when she saw me across that table, she had to remind herself not to look at me the way she did when we were alone. I stepped closer. Slowly. I told her I was done pretending this was casual. She turned then. Really turned toward me. Her eyes were steady but uncertain. She said this could complicate everything. That if it went wrong, it wouldn't just be hearts that got bruised. Careers could bend. Reputations could shift. I told her I understood. Then I told her I didn't care. The words came out simple. Not rehearsed. I said I was in love with her. There was a long silence after that. Not shocked. Just heavy with truth. She searched my face like she was checking for doubt. For regret. She didn't find any. She said she had been trying not to say those same words for weeks. That she had told herself it was distance, chemistry, comfort. Anything but love. Her voice broke slightly when she admitted she was in love with me too. It wasn't explosive. It was quiet. Certain. We stood there, close but not touching yet, both aware that once we crossed that line, there was no pretending anymore. She said she was scared. I told her I was too. Then she stepped into me. The kiss felt different from all the others. Not just heat. Not just want. It carried decision inside it. My hands rested at her waist. Hers slid up around my neck. We held each other like people who had already chosen. When we moved toward the bedroom, it wasn't frantic. It was deliberate. Slow. Layers of hesitation giving way to trust. In the dim light, we undressed without rush. No performance. Just closeness. Skin against skin. Her fingertips tracing the line of my shoulder like she was memorizing it. My hand steady at her back, feeling the rise and fall of her breathing. When we lay down, she rested her forehead against mine for a moment before anything else happened. That pause mattered. There was desire, yes. Strong and unmistakable. But there was also something gentler underneath. Years of being careful. Years of not asking for too much. Afterward, she stayed awake longer than I did. I could feel her hand moving lightly along my chest, absent-minded, like she was making sure I was real. Before we fell asleep, we talked about what came next. We agreed we would not hide. Not sneak around. If this was real, we would handle it properly. We would speak to HR. We would request reporting adjustments. We would accept whatever came with that. She said she refused to let this turn into something shameful. I told her I refused to lose her because of fear. That night wasn't just about love. It was about decision. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't choosing safety. I was choosing her. We told HR on a Monday morning. Not because we were forced to. Not because anyone had accused us of anything. We did it because we said we would. Claire flew into Chicago the night before. We barely slept. Not from nerves exactly, but from knowing the tone of things was about to change. Up until then, our relationship had lived mostly in private spaces. Apartments. Airports. Quiet dinners. Now it would have to survive fluorescent lighting and policy manuals. The HR director listened carefully. She didn't look shocked. She didn't look impressed either. Just thorough. She explained that since Claire technically held a higher executive title within the merged structure, even though we were in separate divisions, there could be perceived conflicts. We told her we understood. By the end of the meeting, it was agreed that I would shift reporting lines. A lateral move on paper. Same pay. Slightly different oversight. It wasn't a demotion, but it was visible. When we walked out of that office together, the air felt thinner. The first whisper started 2 days later. Someone from my team asked casually if I knew Claire. Personally. The way he said personally carried weight. I answered calmly that yes, we were in a relationship, and that it had been disclosed properly. His eyebrows lifted slightly. That was all. By the end of the week, it had spread. Emails came with subtle changes in tone. Meetings felt more observed. A few colleagues went quiet around me. Others suddenly became overly friendly, as if proximity to the situation might benefit them. Claire faced it differently on her side. She received an anonymous message in her company inbox. It questioned her judgment. Suggested she was compromising leadership credibility for personal indulgence. It implied she was clinging to youth. She read it out loud to me one evening over the phone. Her voice didn't shake, but it was slower than usual. I felt anger rise fast and sharp. She sounded tired instead. A week later, another message came. This one suggested I was leveraging her position for advancement. That I had calculated the relationship. That night, she said maybe we should reconsider. Not because she doubted us. Because she feared damaging me. She said she had built her reputation over decades. She could absorb the hits. But I was still climbing. Still proving myself. I told her I didn't want protection. She said she didn't want to watch me get sidelined. There was a long silence after that. I told her I would rather face criticism honestly than step back quietly and resent it later. I said we hadn't broken rules. We had followed every procedure. Transparency wasn't weakness. She admitted she was tired of having to justify wanting something. The real test came a month later. Our division faced a major operational failure. A software migration issue caused reporting delays across 3 states. Executives were furious. Deadlines were collapsing. I was assigned to lead the corrective task force. Some people quietly suggested the role had been handed to me because of Claire. I heard it. Instead of arguing, I worked. 14-hour days. Coordinating teams. Fixing data discrepancies manually when needed. I didn't lean on her. I didn't request special access. If anything, we spoke less during that stretch to avoid perception. 3 weeks later, we delivered the fix. On schedule. In the executive review meeting, the COO commended the turnaround. My name was mentioned specifically. Not as someone's partner. Not as someone's risk. Just as the person who led it. After that, the volume of whispers dropped. Not disappeared. But softened. Claire told me later that a few senior leaders had privately acknowledged her transparency. That the fact we had disclosed early mattered. Still, there were days when she came home from work drained in a way I hadn't seen before. One night, sitting on my couch, she said she hated that loving someone required defense. I told her I hated that she felt she had to earn the right to be happy. She looked at me carefully then, and asked if I was still sure. I didn't hesitate. I said I wasn't interested in comfort that came from shrinking. I was interested in building something that held under pressure. She moved closer to me after that, rested her head against my shoulder the way she had months earlier, only now there was weight in it. History. The pushback didn't vanish overnight. But something else happened. We stopped reacting to it. We showed up to meetings. Delivered results. Treated each other professionally in public and honestly in private. We didn't overshare. We didn't hide. Over time, consistency did what arguments couldn't. People adjusted. And somewhere in the middle of that noise, our relationship grew steadier, not weaker. Because now we knew it could survive being seen. By the time spring settled in, the noise had quieted enough for us to breathe again. Not completely. There were still looks sometimes. Still the occasional comment disguised as humor. But the sharp edge was gone. Results had a way of dulling gossip. Claire began spending more time in Chicago as integration work deepened. What started as 2 nights a month turned into 4, then entire weeks. She kept a small drawer at my apartment. At first it held just a toothbrush and a spare charger. Then a pair of heels. Then a sweater she said she liked better than anything in her own closet. One Sunday morning, she was standing in my kitchen in one of my old t-shirts, making coffee like she had always lived there. Sunlight through the blinds. Bare feet on hardwood. She asked casually what I thought about her leasing her condo in Seattle instead of renewing. I didn't answer right away. Not because I was unsure. Because I understood the weight of it. I told her I didn't want her to feel like she was folding her life into mine. I wanted us to build something that belonged to both of us. She walked over, mug in hand, and said she was tired of living in 2 places emotionally. She said when she left Chicago each time, it felt less like independence and more like interruption. 2 months later, we signed a lease on a larger place together near the river. The first night there, the apartment smelled like fresh paint and cardboard. We ate takeout on the floor because the couch hadn't arrived yet. She laughed when I struggled with the assembly instructions for the bed frame. It felt young in a way that surprised me. Not reckless. Just new. Living together wasn't dramatic. It was ordinary in the best way. She left early some mornings for meetings downtown. I packed lunches when she forgot. She teased me about my predictable wardrobe. I learned how she liked the thermostat set at night. We worked late at the dining table sometimes, laptops open, legs brushing under the wood without thinking about it. There were disagreements too. About closet space. About how many framed photos belonged on the wall. About whether we should host colleagues for dinner. But even the arguments felt steady. No threats of leaving. No silence as punishment. Professionally, the year turned out stronger than either of us expected. Claire was promoted to a broader regional oversight role once the merger stabilized. Public recognition. Board approval. No whispers attached to it anymore. I was offered a director position within my division after the migration recovery was formally reviewed. The offer came without reference to her. It was clean. Earned. The night I told her, she stood in the doorway of our bedroom and looked at me like she was memorizing something. She said she was proud of me. I told her I was proud of her first. The proposal happened on a Tuesday. No candles. No grand gesture. We were sitting on the couch after dinner, both exhausted from long days. She had kicked off her shoes and tucked her legs under herself the way she always did. I told her I didn't want to keep building a life that could still be described as temporary. She went quiet. I reached into the side table drawer where I had hidden the ring weeks earlier. Not extravagant. Just simple. Gold band. Clean stone. I told her I didn't think of her as someone past her prime. I thought of her as the person who made every room feel more honest. My voice wasn't perfectly steady. I said I wanted to marry her. She covered her mouth for a second, not crying, just overwhelmed in that contained way she had. Then she laughed softly and said yes before I could overthink it. When I slid the ring onto her finger, it felt less like a dramatic milestone and more like something settling into place. Later that night, lying beside her in the dark, she told me she never thought she would do this again. I told her neither did I. But here we were. Not starting over. Starting better. We kept the wedding small on purpose. After everything we had walked through, either of us wanted spectacle. We wanted clarity. We chose a late September afternoon by the lake, just as the air started to cool but before Chicago turned sharp. There were maybe 40 people there. Close friends. A few colleagues who had seen the whole arc from suspicion to respect. My sister flew in from Boston. Her parents came, slower now, but smiling in a way that felt relieved. Even her son stood tall beside her, proud in a quiet way. The ceremony took place in a small garden space near the waterfront. No grand aisle. Just folding chairs and a simple wooden arch with white fabric that moved gently in the breeze. When Claire walked toward me, she didn't look nervous. She looked steady. The dress was simple. Clean lines. Nothing dramatic. Her hair was down. She held my gaze the whole way. I remember thinking how strange it was that someone once told her she should be grateful anyone still wanted her. Standing there, I felt like the grateful one. Our vows weren't poetic. We wrote them ourselves, kept them honest. I told her that she had taught me courage without noise. That she had shown me strength didn't have to be sharp to be powerful. I promised to stand beside her, not behind her, not in front of her. Beside. She said I had given her peace. That I had made steadiness feel like safety instead of boredom. She promised not to shrink herself to make anyone comfortable ever again. There were a few quiet tears in the crowd. Not dramatic. Just human. When we kissed, it wasn't the kind of kiss meant for applause. It was familiar. Grounded. The same certainty that had begun in a hotel hallway, only now witnessed. At the reception, I noticed something I hadn't expected. The same colleague who once asked if I knew her, personally, shook my hand and said we made sense. No sarcasm in it. Just acknowledgement. Claire's promotion had been finalized months earlier. My director role was secure. Whatever doubts people had carried had dissolved into normalcy. No one whispered anymore. Later that evening, when most guests had drifted toward the dance floor, Claire and I stepped aside to the edge of the patio overlooking the water. The city skyline glowed behind us. She asked if I ever thought about that café in Denver. I said I did. Especially the moment I stood up from that table. If I had stayed seated, none of this would have happened. She rested her head lightly against my shoulder, wedding ring catching the light. People had said it wouldn't work. Not openly. But in tone. In raised eyebrows. In careful language. They were wrong. Not because we proved something loudly. Because we stayed. We chose each other when it was inconvenient. When it was questioned. When it required adjustment instead of impulse. As the night wound down and we said goodbye to the last of our guests, I realized something simple. We hadn't defied the world. We had just refused to let it define us. If you had told me 3 years ago that one conversation in a hotel cafe would change the course of my life, I would have smiled politely and gone back to my spreadsheets. I used to believe love belonged to people who were braver, louder, more interesting than I was. I thought steady meant forgettable. I thought being reliable meant being replaceable. What I learned is that steady is strength. Quiet can still choose courage. And sometimes speaking up once, even awkwardly, even out of character, opens a door you didn't know was there. Claire taught me that age is not decline. It is depth. It is history carried with grace. The world may try to measure a woman's worth by years, but that measurement is shallow. She was never past anything. She was fully herself. That was the point. And I learned something about fear. Fear tells you to protect your reputation. To avoid discomfort. To step back before anyone can question you. But the life I have now came from doing the opposite. From choosing transparency. From standing beside someone when it would have been easier to stay quiet. We were told, in small ways, that it might not work. That it was complicated. That it looked risky. It was complicated. It was risky. It was worth it. Love, at this stage of life, is not fireworks every day. It is coffee in the morning. It is someone reaching for your hand in a meeting without making a scene. It is knowing that when the room gets loud, there is one person who sees you clearly. One decision in a hotel cafe. One choice not to stay silent. That was all it took to shift everything. If you are waiting for permission to choose what feels real, you probably will not get it. Most meaningful things do not come with applause at the beginning. Sometimes they start with discomfort. And sometimes, if you are willing to risk being seen, they grow into something steady enough to build a life on.